can see behind me here, the CB750's had even more work done to it on the final assembly, and I've even made some custom parts. But rather than tell you, let me show you. If you don't have a workshop manual and you're looking for these exact schematic drawings to get things back in the way they came out, you can print these off CMS's website. It's always an exciting time when we can get them back on their 2 feet on their own. The swing arm is in, the suspension's in. Let me just mention a couple of things. So these bolts are going to be black. The original OEM ones are at the Cerakotas, so when they come back, I'll change those out. I'm probably going to be getting a few other bits and pieces Cerakoted as well, like this axle and nut. So now that everything's coated and looking nice and fresh and new, this stainless chain guard that I built, which I did an entire video on, if you haven't seen it, it's a really good video to show you the process of making something like this. Even if this isn't something you're making, it'll show you the process of making something similar to this. Definitely worth checking that out. I'll leave that at the end. But leave me a comment on what you think I should do with this. Should I go gloss black, matte black, leave it stainless, or the other option was introducing the color from the engine down through there, which is the cast iron color that I used for VHT paint. There's quite a few parts that I'm waiting on to finish the assembly of this bad boy, but while we're waiting, I want to have an attempt of trying to make a set of these. These are the caps that go on the either side of the swing arm bolt. They sit on the outside of the frame and they kind of are always on display, so I want to make a custom set, or at least try. I'm using a product here called acetal. It's a type of plastic and quite hard, so therefore easy to machine. The reason I'm using plastic rather than aluminium is because I've got a brand new powder coated frame and I don't want to scratch it. Aluminium being my second option, I think that I really want to stick with plastic if I can, because plastic is what was on the bike originally, so let's remake them and make them custom. I've found with plastics, when you introduce heat, it doesn't have to be necessarily a flame, you can use a heat gun, will actually bring the shine back to the plastic. It doesn't always work, and be careful how much you do because you will burn it, but for this case it worked perfectly. I'm pretty happy with it, but there's a few steps that I'm still left to do, and one is cutting a groove into it similar to the original one. So the groove that I need to cut is this one here to allow it to lock in place, and it's 2.5 millimeters wide. My parting tool, which I would normally use for something like this, is 4 millimeters wide, and I don't have anything thinner. Everything's closed at the moment because it's Sunday, so kind of is a bit up in the air on how I'm going to do this at the moment. And the other thing I've got to try and figure out is how I'm going to hollow this out. The best way to do it would be to part it off. So cut it off and then spin it around, but putting it in the jaws will damage it because it's only plastic. So I've got to try and figure out how I'm going to do that as well. So what I'm actually doing here is using an old broken drill bit to make a tool for my lathe to cut that groove perfectly in the plastic. I've used drill bits for all sorts of random things in the past, but this will be the first time ever making one for a tool for my lathe, so thanks Tom for the idea. So So this little collet idea, I give full ownership to my friend Tom. He actually said to me, just make the collet and then do a cut in one side and it should be able to clamp on to the part quite well if you make it tight enough. Sure enough, he was right. Well, it's definitely not going to be falling out. It's snapped in place quite tightly and I'm really impressed with how the fitment went. Now to make another one. So what I also did off camera was I cut a little bit of a slot on the underside of this. Exactly the same as the OEM Honda one. So you can slide a screwdriver up there and just pop it off if you need to. For whatever reason, if I ever need to take that swing arm out again, at least it's easy to get in and out. So what I've got to do with this clutch cover is replace the seal that sits on this shaft. It's actually the shaft that the clutch cable pulls on. And the seal was pretty busted. I think some media got in there and I wasn't really happy with it, so I thought I may as well just get a new one. I ordered the parts from CMS&L, this OEM quality stuff. So I got the seal and I also got the pin. So the pin here is pretty much what the spring sits on this shaft. So this is the pin. I got to push this one out and replace it with a new one. The wire for the turn signals was originally designed to go between the gap of the bottom plate as well as the frame, and unfortunately since it's all been coated, the gap has gotten a lot smaller and I'm worried that this wire is going to get pinched. So it's a bit of an oversight of mine. I think I need to actually put little rubber grommets in there and run the wire up through the bottom of the bottom plate, which is nice and professional anyway. So I've just had a delivery, which I'm going to show in the next video, but I'll give you a bit of a sneak peek. It's all of the parts that have come back from 74 Works getting Cerakoted. Man, these parts look so good. He does such an amazing job. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, if you haven't seen how I made that custom chain guard out of stainless, I'll leave that video right here. It's a really good video, even if you're not intending on making a chain guard. It's just a good video on showing you how to make things. And also, part 3 will be left here when it's ready.